Hello YouTube. So I think it's it's finally time to do the comparison between these two printers. You see them printing away here on a test print I've done, or I'm doing a lattice cube. Let's just adjust the camera and see if we can get in a little bit closer. Like I said in the extruder video, I was gonna adjust the retraction to combat clogs, but that seems to have been a bad idea because now it's stringing like all to hell, and it's the same on both printers really. Lots and lots of strings. But anyway, that's a slicer issue, not really a printer issue. So let's have a look at what's going on with my Wanhao compared to the Maker Select. So if we look, this tripod is a bit wobbly. Let's try and see if we can fix that slightly. Okay, about there. So if you look at the Wanhao, obviously it's got an upgraded cooler shroud. I think it's called the D-Cooler, DII cooler, which uses a 40 mil, or is it 50? Probably 50 mil radial fan. Moves a lot more air than the stock one. And just as a spoiler before we go on to the actual print results, it seems to really be the key factor to getting better prints on this upgrade. The cooling is really the key, as from what I've seen so far. The stock cooler can actually do an okay job. Let's just move over to that. It only the main difference, it's maybe moves a bit less air, but also it's it only blows from one direction. But if you order in your prints correctly, then it doesn't make a lot of difference, depending on the print of course. But we'll see that when we look at some benchies. You can see what's going on there. And back to the Wanhao. So the only other major mod, while I'm running Octoprint on it, I want to upgrade the firmware. There's a few things I want to do that I haven't done yet, but just looking at what I've done is I've got the C-brace mod, which is these feet. It goes up and then you can tighten it up there and adjust it so you have a perfect 90-degree angle between the tower and the base. Plus it adds some rigidity to the tower, which is maybe more important if you haven't got, if you've got the spool holder up top, sitting on top of the printer, because then you can get some oscillations. There's a lot of extra weight up there. With that removed, I'm guessing the C-brace mod is maybe not as important as long as your printer is actually square, it's got the 90-degree angle that it needs to the bed, then it's maybe not so important really. But yeah, otherwise it's running Octoprint. It's still the stock firmware. I'm guessing actually the Maker Select has a newer firmware, because I've never actually updated the firmware on the Wanhao. It's still running the one it came with from the factory, and it's almost 2 years old. I'm guessing there's newer firmwares available, but well, as far as options in the menu go, there doesn't seem to really be any difference. So we'll have a look at the prints, but my preliminary conclusion is, yeah, upgrade the cooling. The C-brace mod is kind of optional. It's nice to have, but it doesn't really seem to do a whole lot regarding print quality. Now I know my Wanhao, I've recently tightened the X-axis belt. I know the Y-axis belt on my Wanhao needs to be tightened, but it's inside, down in the base of the printer, so I need to take it all apart to get to that. So I haven't gotten around to that before these tests. I'll do it when I install the BL touch sensor for auto bed leveling. Then I'll definitely do that as well when I'm in there, because I need to get in and solder some extra pins onto the control board when we get to that. So yeah, that's the main difference really between these. Plus, well, okay, I've also made some tweaks to the firmware on the Wanhao. I've calibrated the extruder. From the factory, it came with somewhere between 5 and 10% under extrusion. I haven't done any thorough tests to figure that out yet on the Maker Select, but I do have a sneaky suspicion that it's under extruding slightly, and that's actually on a lot of prints, like benchies and stuff. Under extrusion can be kind of a cheat to make it look better than the quality of the print better than it really is. Because as long as you've got enough walls and top and bottom layers and stuff, then you, unless you go into really minor details, you can't really see if it's under extruding 5% really. But you can see over extrusion though. That's pretty easy, and even spot on extrusion if it's not mega precise. Then you start getting blobs and stuff on the outside because the extra plastic that you're extruding, it doesn't have anywhere to go. If there's tiny inaccuracies in the inner walls and then it goes to print the outer walls, then you'll see the blob on the outside because it gets pushed out if there's inaccuracies, oscillations and stuff. So actually I think the Maker Select might be under extruding. I need to do a thorough calibration of it, and I'll do that in a later video, I think. But right now we're just comparing them as they came out of the box. But my Wanhao did it from the factory, and I think the Maker Select is under extruding a tiny bit as well. So that could kind of be on purpose to make the finish of the prints look better than they really are. As long as you don't get major gaps, then people will just think, oh, that looks nice, and then you see an extruder calibrated correctly. Well, then other stuff like inaccuracies, oscillations and stuff in the print will show up more, because then you'll start getting blobs on the outside when the filament doesn't have anywhere to go. Anyway, I'll just line up some of the test prints, and we'll also get a shot of those when they're done. Even though these, you see, well, there's a lot of stringing. You'll also see a lot of other faults with these prints here. Mainly because I'm running this quite fast. This is considered a torture test for printers, and you'll see why when we get to look at them. I have another one that I printed earlier on the Wanhao, which looks a lot nicer than these, but it's printed at like 1/3 of the speed, as far as I remember. So when you start pushing it, you'll see a lot of defects with these kind of tests. But that's fine, because we wanna expose the defects of these printers. We wanna see, and the faster you go, the easier it is to spot where something goes wrong, because the tiny errors, the defects, gets magnified by the speed quite often. So I'll just line up on my benches for now, and then we'll get a look at these when they're done. But be right back. Okay, so here we have my fleet of benches. We've got an extra one out back here with some different settings, and I haven't printed that on the other printer. All the red ones are from the Maker Select. All the white ones are from the Wanhao. And if we just look at them and see if I didn't order them correctly, fast. So let's start with, it's printed fast, but not extremely fast. I don't know how well the details are gonna show up on this, because I don't know if my camera can really focus on this. But I mean, it's close to a perfect benchy from both of printers, really. It's kind of, yeah. There's some tiny defects now. I only use 2 top layers, so that's showing through a tiny bit here. If you can maybe see that, there's some holes on the top layer, but that's kind of on purpose. There's a tiny defect around this hole back here, plus some curling up on the edge, on the corner here. The arch on the housing here looks really nice, actually. Really nice. Of course, if you look inside, there's hardly any stringing. That's before I changed the retraction setting. And if we look at the Wanhao, it's pretty much the same. Although I'd say we don't have these curls up as much here on the back corners. That looks, well, maybe kind of the same. But otherwise, what we do have is a tiny bit of blobs here and there. And that's what I mean, I think. Whereas if you've got anything at all here, you actually got a line or two here and there where it seems like it's under-extruded. That's what I mean about I need to calibrate the extruder. And some of the defects on this, if you saw my extruder maintenance video, I need to change the nozzle on that, the Wanhao, I think. But otherwise, two really good benchies. That was at the fast settings. Then we pushed it some more and we go to faster. And honestly, again, the same curling here. But otherwise, they're pretty much identical. So the difference between these is this is printed at, I think, 60 millimeters per second at 0.28 millimeter layer heights. This is pushed to 80 or 90 millimeters per second, and as you see, there's hardly any difference. Even on the Maker Select, which hasn't got the C-brace mod, it still does pretty damn well. And then we go to the fastest setting, which is again 90 millimeters or 80 millimeters, but at 0.32 millimeter layer height. Well, that's not it. That's it. We can see, well, of course you can see the steps here a lot more pronounced, but again, it's close to perfect. Really, the only thing that's the finish here is a bit, it seems a little bit blobby here and there. And this seems like it might have under-extruded slightly here and there. That's really the only difference between these two printers. And then we went to the high quality settings, which is half the speed at like 40 millimeters per second. It's 0.2 millimeter layer height, but actually with a curious adaptive layer height. So it's adjust all the way down to 0.12 layer height, which is most of this is printed at, probably. And it's a really nice benchy. Tiny defects around the hole in the back here. The arch is drooped like, yeah, 1/4 millimeter lower than it should, but it's a really nice benchy. No problems at all. So it can print, I mean, the Maker Select can print benchies just fine out of the box. That's not a problem. Although, like I said, I will calibrate the extruder. I think I'm gonna do a separate video about just calibrating extruders and the axes. So we're gonna make a separate video about that at some point. It can also do functional prints. Just go handheld here for a tiny second. Now, if you saw my supersized lag rack tour video, you'll see I've got these spool holders up here on top. That has been printed on the Maker Select itself, so it does absolutely fine with functional prints. If that's what you want, that's perfectly adequate out of the box. Like I said, I think it's under-extruding a tiny bit. You correct that. Dimensions seemed pretty well, so probably not a lot of adjustments there needed. Oh, and one thing, I don't know if I said it, but it's actually a tiny bit faster, the Maker Select, than the Wanhao. because I've actually lowered the acceleration and jerk max settings in the firmware of this one. So some of the quality differences could come from there as well. I'm actually think I'm gonna up it a little bit again, but yeah. So we'll just wait for these lattice cubes to finish, and then we're gonna do the final comparison. Give you my conclusions about whether it's really worth it. Yeah, so be right back. Really, so that's not really much. Yeah, that's a fault of mine and the slicing and not of the printers. Now, when I look at these, otherwise, what we really want to see is the edges here. Every time it goes up like this, here, it lays your angles kind of like the front of the steam, the benchy here. And what happens is that it tends to curl up and stuff here along this bottom edge, and it really wants to curl up, especially if you don't have enough cooling. That's one of the major things you can tell by something like this. And I would say when I look at it, you see like this edge here, I think that's been on the back side of where the stock cooler is blowing, so it's been printed like this, I think. Something like that, maybe this or this, but I think this has been on the back side. That looks pretty rough around here. If we can get a focus going. No, we cannot. Why? Are you not focusing? Yeah. So this looks pretty rough, a little better on this side. Whereas this has the better cooling. This is probably where it has gotten the least cooling. That's the major difference. So really what I've concluded with this is, well, upgrading the cooler to something that blows from several different sides. What I did with the benchy, it doesn't look bad on these generally. But what I did was I turned the benchy towards the cooler, so it's blowing in this way or in from here. Because I know this part is very sensitive to cooling. So a lot of prints you can kind of salvage, even though you don't upgrade the cooling. You just turn the prints around, orient them correctly to where they need the most cooling. You can kind of get around that, but upgrading cooler is pretty nice. We don't spot a whole lot else. It's printed pretty fast, but still there's some unevenness on the edges, but that's really present on both. Maybe the one with the C-brace is a little bit smoother in places, but they, again, could just be the cooling. So what I'm doing right now is I'm printing calibration tubes, huge calibration tubes, and at high speeds, for the most part, fairly high speeds. So we should see the printer really getting up to speed. We're printing 8 by 8 by 8 centimeters cubes. It'll use up quite a bit of filament. What the hell? Go big or go home, you know. So if there's any like ringing and ghosting effects and stuff going along around the edges, it should be really easy to spot on these huge cubes. So that'll be the next step. So I just gotta wait for these to finish, and then I'll be right back with you. Okay, so it's time to have a look at my big cubes here. These are printed with the dimensions of 80 millimeters by 80 millimeters by 80 millimeters. Oh, that would be that way. And let's just check the dimensions first of all. So on this new printer here, this would be the x-axis, we have just about 8 millimeter, maybe a quarter of a millimeter too large, but that could just be ghosting and ringing and stuff in the extrusion. We test the y-axis, we get pretty much the same. So that looks pretty good. And then the Z-axis, we get pretty much spot on 8 millimeters. So as far as the dimensions are concerned, the new Maker Select is definitely on point. Let's check the old one. I've never really measured this too accurately. It seems to be a little bit under on the Z-axis. That could just be, you know, the first layer height that's slightly messing with that. Then we are looking at the Y-axis now. It's pretty much spot on 8 millimeters, and the X here. That's actually a bit too wide. Actually, that's the one that's been farthest off from any of these. Yeah, so it seems like this is off by almost 2 millimeters. So I should actually go in and adjust the steps for the X-axis in the firmware on my old Wanhao. I rarely print anything where dimensions are super duper critical, but that's something to remember. Anyways, if we look at the quality of the prints, now I'm getting some, if you look down this side, I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but there's some slight ghosting and stuff going on here, and actually also on the on this side here. So both the Y and X-axis could probably use some belt tightening. I know there was a problem with the Y-axis. If that jiggles, then it will show up on this side here, because that's how it is oriented. I'm not actually sure if I oriented it the correct way, because yeah, this is the X-axis going this way, but the ringing you'll see up this side would actually be from the Y-axis, if that's wobbling when it moves back and forth like that. And the same thing here. I have tightened the X-axis a bit here recently, but the Y-axis hasn't been done in a long time, because you have to get into the base of the printer to do that. I have seen some mods you can do where you can actually get a screw to tighten it, so you can get a lot tighter than doing it by hand. So I'll probably add that to both the X and Y axes on the Wanhao. If we look on the Maker Select, it's pretty good. Still a tiny bit. Again, I don't know if the camera actually shows up. If it actually shows up, I mean, it's not a perfect finish. And there's a few lines here and there. It looks like we may have some under extrusion, which I'm definitely gonna be looking into. So I think we're gonna do a calibration video where we calibrate, because this looks like it might actually be extruding very slightly. So I think we're gonna do a video at some point where we do a full calibration of the extruder particularly, but also show how you to change the steps in the firmware of these printers, because I will need to do that on the Wanhao. It's too wide actually on the X. But other than that, they came out pretty good. There's some small defects in the letters and stuff, but that's mainly because of the way I sliced it, with almost no infill and not a huge amount of top and bottom layers and stuff like that. So that was to be expected, really. I just wanted to speed up the printing process of these as much as possible and not use any more filament than needed. It still used like 20-25 meters of filaments each, so they're fairly chunky pieces, but yeah. So in conclusion for this episode, I mean, out of the box, how does it compare to an old modified printer that I've run in? And well, actually, in some regards, I'll say the new printer always looks better than the old printer. I mean, the old printer is probably getting a bit tired. The belts need at least tightening or maybe even replacing. The nozzle could do with replacing probably on the Wanhao. And I mean, what you get out of box with a Maker Select here, or probably any other rebrand of the Wanhao printers, is perfectly acceptable for pretty much anybody. It's a very nice printer, even out of the box without any mods or anything. As in regards to mods, well, I think the most important thing is, like we saw with the lattice cubes, there are some sides that seems to be a bit more rough than others, whereas they are a bit more even in terms of quality, even though it's pretty bad quality all around because it's printed quite fast and the retraction was crap. But I screwed it up in the slicer. But I think a different part cooling solution is a must-have regards to mods. Then I would say do a calibration, a nice big calibration cube. I mean, you can do these small ones that's 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter and stuff. But I mean, if it's off by, on the x-axis here, it's off by less than 2 millimeters on an 8 centimeter wide cube. I mean, if you print, that's, you know, like 2%. If you print a 1 millimeter, a 1 centimeter wide cube, are you really gonna catch that? Even with super accurate calibers, you know, you might just think, yeah, that's probably within tolerance and stuff. But if you print something large that needs very specific, you know, like screw holes that has to fit together and stuff in very specific positions, then that might be a problem. So I'd say you should do the calibration. You should do the extruder calibration. That's extremely important because I know my Wanhao was under extruding from the factory and I turned it up, but it seems but there's every now and then, I don't know if the nozzle or maybe I just turned it up a little bit too much. Every now and then it looks kind of like it may be over extruding slightly, whereas, like I said, the new Maker Select look like it might be under extruding slightly. So we'll calibrate that. I would recommend you do that if you get any of these printers. The cooling fan stuff. Oh yeah, the belts. If I go into tightening the belts and stuff on my Wanhao, which I need to do at some point, then I'll probably point out there are some springs on the belts for tension. The problem is springs for tension is actually pretty bad, because that means your belts are gonna be springy. I mean, they're gonna have a give to them. So when you move really fast, that spring is gonna you know, go up and down in tension, and the length of the belt was actually kind of slightly changed, so you will get some artifacting. It doesn't look very bad, but it's just the principle of using a spring to tension the belt is just bad, to be honest. So yeah, I'll say get rid of those and tension the belt in another way. I'm probably going to do a mod where I can actually do it, adjust it with screws, rather than you have to do it the more manual way with zip ties and all that stuff. So I think that's the most important part. Then there's the C-brace. I'd say when the printer is brand new, it doesn't seem to really need it. And if you don't know what the C-brace is, let me just pick up the camera here and have a look directly at what I'm talking about. So the C-brace is this stuff here. It holds the tower in place. I mean, especially now that I've removed the spool from the top of the printer, it doesn't really seem to need it. But when I grab the printer, there's a definite gift to this. And well, the thing about that is the towers, the closer you are to the bed, the less you can see it. So to really see the effect of this, you need to print something as tall as possible, which is 18 centimeters on this printer. But it does have a definite give to it, so I'm probably gonna do that, but especially if you remove the spool from the top, it's maybe not super essential unless you print a lot of really tall stuff. So yeah, that's as far as I've come so far. Other than that, I'll be adding the BL touch sensors. I've got 2, so I can add them to both. But I'll do one at a time and show you in a video. That will also entail actually upgrading the firmware. So after I've tried that on, well, not on this printer, I've messed a lot with the firmware on this printer. So I think I have a pretty good idea of how to do it. So yeah, but my opinions haven't really changed from why I bought this printer in the first place. I mean, it's a printer I would very highly recommend, to be honest, because it just works, even just out of the box. It does a pretty damn good job. I mean, if you can get a Cura profile for somebody who knows how this printer is going to work, but with the stock extruder and everything, if they start to change that, then yeah, then it's hopeless. But even just, I mean, the G-code I printed on the Wanhao, which it's dialed in for and I've had for almost 2 years, it prints perfectly for on the Maker Select. So, I mean, yeah, out of the box, it's a great printer. With some mods, it's an even a better printer, and I'm going to install some more mods, so it's gonna be even more awesome. And hopefully I get as many hours out of this printer as I've done with the Wanhao, without any major trouble. Of course, there's also these small things you need to maintain, like we saw in the video the other day, the extruder. Also, a problem I had with the Wanhao, if you see this little switch down here, that's the Y end stop. That is not stock. I have replaced that. It's just a cheap switch. I mean, you can literally get them for like 20 cents on eBay. Yeah, can't focus on it now, but whatever. Literally 20 cents on eBay, so, you know, not a big deal. You just solder it onto the wire there, and then you're good to go. And it's the standard size and everything, so it even fits into, let's go around here. You can see that it even fits directly into the screws in there, which my camera is having a lot of trouble picking up. But it fits directly into the screws. So really not a big deal. And then tightening the belts every now and then. Of course, yeah, I almost forgot to mention the glass bed. I mean, the build tag is fine. It sticks really well on everything. Actually, I think it sticks too well. Especially PLA can really kind of weld itself down. Actually, I prefer to run the nozzle a little bit high off the bed when I print on a build tag like this, because otherwise it gets almost impossible to remove your print from the bed afterwards, which is very annoying. Whereas with a glass bed, well, I use some tape usually. You can also use hairspray and different kind of stuff. I just find the tape the most consistent for how I use my printer anyway. You know, you can use the scraper and then fuck it if you fuck up the tape. I mean, it's just, yeah, it's like there's like this. It's there was another roll even thicker, and that's for these 3 rolls. It's, I don't know, $3 roughly. So it's cheap. It's cheap. yeah. So I think that's all I have to say for these initial comparisons about these printers and how it is out of the box. I mean, the only thing I have actually done to it so far is move the spool up top there. Otherwise, it's completely stock as it is. It's just a matter of throwing some well-sliced G-code at it, and then it will do the job perfectly, pretty much. But in the next episode, we're probably going to do a calibration video, calibrate the extruder, fix my x-axis on the Wanhao, and then we're going to add the cooling solution, the C-braces. We're going to do the BL Touch and upgrading of firmware, and we're going to add an Octopi of some sort. I still don't know if I'm going to use that Orange Pi or I'm going to switch to an actual Raspberry. I haven't looked into what's wrong with the Orange Pi anymore since I discovered it had issues. But anyway, that'll be it for today, guys. So if you liked this video, please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more, and see all the follow-ups to what I'm going to do to these printers, or some of the other stuff that I'm planning on doing, like playing around with old Commodore computers and just generally playing around with electronics, really, of every sort and variety, and maybe even my older HP servers down there. Yeah. Until next time, take care.